All right, hello, everyone. My name is Deborah. Can you all hear me? Perfectly? Okay, good. No microphone needed. My background is that I'm a graphic designer and a self-employed. I run my own business and have been doing this for nearly 20 years, revealing my age, and been a software trainer for about 12 of those years, so teaching everything to do with print design originally and then moving on into digital as well, Illustrator, Photoshop, and all these kind of subjects. And the new buzzword on the street is infographics. So basically, it's something that's quite new. It's only been about 3 years or so that infographics have become so popular. Well, they've been around for hundreds of years, but the need for having one is suddenly everywhere. And agencies are going crazy about them. Every client calls me and thinks they need one. Have you had that? Suddenly it's like everyone was, I need an infographic. So I want to talk to you today about what infographics are and demystify a little bit about who needs them, whether they're necessary for absolutely every business, what makes an infographic, what is an infographic. And basically looking at examples and seeing how to go about creating one for different environments. Now that's a lot to do within that short period of time. It's more just a quick overview really of this topic. So basically, first question, what exactly is an infographic? So a nice flyer with a nice pretty picture on it and some text is not an infographic. And a nice little campaign is not an infographic. So many people use the term for almost everything that has a bit of text and a bit of numbers in it. But an infographic really is making data look sexy, so to speak. Basically, what an infographic is it's data visualization. It's taking a bunch of statistics, numbers, spreadsheets, graphs, and making it interesting by telling the story behind the numbers. So pulling out what's exciting about the data that you're faced with and making it into a visual story. So if you're looking at a spreadsheet with lots and lots of information, most of us just switch off, unless we've been in that industry and we're looking at this stuff the whole time. We're used to, if you're in the finance world and you're looking at stock market reports, you're used to dissecting what you need. But for the average user, looking at an Excel spreadsheet or just a document full of graphs and charts is a bit too much to handle. So an infographic is taking away that mystery by making it look interesting and telling that story. This is Lego's infographic on infographics. We'll be looking at a lot of examples like this. So an infographic, according to Lego, and I think it's nice the way they've done that, is that it's a bunch of messed up data that you're hit with, a whole annual report full of information, and you sort it out, you the designer, the visualizer, sort it into, manageable information, manageable chunks, then you arrange it in the order in which you think it should be read, and then you make it pretty and present it visually. So from that, actually, what's interesting is that it's a very unusual part of the industry, because an infographic is 50% information and 50% graphic. The clue is in the title. And, in our industry, in our jobs, there's the writers, there's the journalists, the editors, etc., and then there's the designers, and they don't interact much with each other. You get the text, and then you go with making it into a document as the designer, as most of us. But in this situation, you need to be both. You need to be a little bit of a designer and a little bit of a researcher, a little bit of a psychologist, a little bit of a writer to create an interesting infographic. That's what makes it quite challenging. So whereas with my graphic design work, I often don't even read the text or I just skim through it. When I do a brochure, I just need to get a general idea of what I'm designing. With an infographic, I need to really, really understand what I'm designing before I can make it work. So that's the challenge. Let's have a look at a few just so you know what we're talking about here, there's so many different types of infographics. We could spend a whole day looking at so many different ways of creating infographics, but just an example of one So in infographic, you see basically there's a lot of data in here. Sorry, it's a bit blurry, but just to give you an idea. And usually you'll see a mix of things, bar charts, pie charts, maps, text, coming together to tell a story. Another example, I know I'm not leaving you enough time to actually read them, it's just to show you what typically an infographic is. Very often you see the numbers, the important bits are pulled out, big percentage marks, big, so that the first thing that hits you is the main data that they're visualizing for you. And there's so many different ways of going about it, so this is a bit more, corporate looking in a way, sticking to very corporate branding guidelines. I imagine that those are their corporate colors to begin with, the orange and the green. And telling a story, again, a mixture of text, a mixture of imagery, icons, and so on. Or it could just be very, very visual with not that much data in it, but still making the text pop and visually very quickly explaining what would be quite difficult to describe in just the written word. Okay? So, yeah, so as I said, this is what makes it such a tricky industry, is that if you're a data researcher, you won't have the graphic design knowledge to create the infographic. If you're a graphic designer, you might not have the data knowledge or the knowledge of how to dissect the data, shall I say, to create it. So you kind of have to work with each other as well. And often I need to go back, from a design perspective, I need to then go back to the writer, to the researcher, and say, can you give me some more information here? Because I'm stuck of how best to sell this piece of information. Okay? So before we go into that, into actually setting it up, let's address question number 2. Why have infographics suddenly become so popular? So again, there was nobody knew what they were about 6 years ago, I don't think. And then suddenly everyone wants one. So what exactly has driven that? And again, you could read books this thick on the history of infographics and how they've become more and more prominent. But there's some key reasons, really, as to why this has happened. And one of them, the main one really, is that we are living in a time of information overload. We are bombarded with data at a staggering, speed every day. I mean, if you have your smartphones on your lap, some of you, and there's probably news flashes popping in at you as we speak. And we're looking at so much stuff on a daily basis. And the statistics say that it's 5 times more information that we're being presented with today than we did a little bit like around 20 years ago or so. So that's quite a lot. And as a result of that, as a whole, collective humanity, our attention span is becoming reduced. It's actually quite scary. It's kind of like devolution rather than evolution. It's just, we can't focus on stuff anymore. So basically, this statistic, which is 2014 statistic, says that over the course of the last 10 years, the average attention span has dropped from 12 minutes to a staggeringly short 5 minutes. So basically, I've spoken now for 5 minutes. I've lost most of the room already. So that's pretty scary. And because of that, when you're giving somebody a sheet of data, you kind of expect that they will lose interest within a few minutes of reading that piece of information unless you do something. And what you need to do is make it visual. So if you're looking at this slide here and wanting to read that, it's not so bad, just a bit of text. But here is an infographic, slightly different statistic. It talks about seconds, and it's from last year, so the data is a bit off or a bit different. But still, that's an infographic about our attention span. So 43% of people abandon emails within the first 30 seconds. Anyway, but already, I don't know if you're looking at this now, you're probably more likely to want to look at this and engage with this than with these 2 really boring text slides up above, right? So that's the idea behind the need for infographics, is that we are very, very visual. And again, studies show that 90% of information that goes to the brain is visual. So we're much more likely to respond to something that is pretty and has colors and images in it than if it's just text. And that's a global thing, actually. So basically, again, infographics hones in on that. Obviously, then, with social media and all those other relatively new aspects of it, it means that because it gets to the brain quicker and it grabs people's attention quicker, they're more likely to engage with it, respond to it. So you'll get a lot more likes on a Facebook post that is a photograph rather than if it's just text. You'll get a lot of retweets, a lot more retweets if you're tweeting something with an image than if you're tweeting just text. So from a marketing perspective, that's a huge factor. And then there's also the fact that graphics remove the language barrier. I mean, that's quite obvious, I know, but we, again, with digital marketing and cross-platform advertising, we're becoming more and more international. So companies now want campaigns that go global, not just within an English-speaking environment. Or you might want to address people, for example, the NHS will want to have posters up that are easy to understand for people who might not necessarily speak English well. So they will rely on infographics a lot to explain, you know, the newest screening tests or the newest services available. Because if you look at this sign here, the first one, if you speak English, you'll know that the road is icy, but if you don't, you'll slide away into the street. If you speak German, you'll know that this is exactly pretty much the same message. But that is pretty much international, right? A car swerving and a little snowflake, and that'll pretty much work anywhere you go. So that's where the visual aspects come in again. So which makes, you know, what I said earlier, that we kind of are going back in time, because if you go back to ancient Egypt and hieroglyphs and using icons to communicate, we're back there again now with infographics. So we're using less and less words and more imagery in our communication. Here's just a little, again, an infographic with more of those kind of statistics, repeating a lot of what I just said about the information that's transmitted to the brain having to be visual, and the bottom line that most people would rather read an infographic than they would want to read some boring bit of data. Okay? And from a campaign perspective, this means that it's actually really tempting to use infographics because people are 3 times more likely to post and share your infographic than they would share your regular post. Which means it's great for campaigns. It's great for backlinking. You know, if you're trying to get traffic back to your company website, etc. Again, because people will share it. Instagram, Pinterest, all those avenues. That's where your infographics become very powerful. It's really good for brand recognition as well. If you design it in a way that it reflects your brand, the color scheme, the fonts that you use, so that people will become more aware of your brand, you know, from that angle as well. So I wouldn't go away visually with infographics completely from the company's branding. I would stick to somewhat to their, you know, to their corporate guidelines, if there are some, if they have them. And that also means that it can go viral quite much more likely than just a bit of text. Here's another very over-the-top infographic on this topic, which again repeats a lot of what we just said. 40% of people will respond, are more likely to respond to something that has visual information rather than just plain text. And I love this. Infographics go viral. It doesn't, no, they can go viral, they don't go viral. My favorite client meeting that I had a few weeks ago was where he sat down with me and said he wants me to start a new campaign, and it's got to be, you know, dynamic, and it's got to be effective, and it's got to go viral. And it's kind of like press the go viral button on your screen. You know? There's no guarantee. I mean, of course, there's things you can do to hope to push it in that direction, but you cannot determine whether something will go viral or not, right? But still, in the grand scheme of things, it's more likely to go viral. An infographic is a lot more likely to go viral than just a plain text press release. And also, talking of press releases, journalists and people in charge of PR are much more likely. It says up here, there, and that it'll catch the eye of journalists much more if you're sending a press release that has an infographic in it than if you're sending just an A4, typed up document. So yeah, so that explains a little bit about the importance of infographics in our day and age, and it's not going away, by the way. Like, it's one of those things where in the beginning I was like, just a bit of a buzzword, but then suddenly, you realize actually it goes up by 1% increase every day in terms of production of infographics and also the search for infographics on Google, etc. So it's going to become, I think, more and more rather than less and less. Having said that, it sometimes is a little bit crazy how many infographics we are being presented with today, and also how every company thinks they want one or need one. So the next question really is, do you really need an infographic? So I've just told you how great they are, but does that mean that you need to take every little bit of text that you're being sent and every little Excel spreadsheet and make an infographic? It's very time consuming. It takes a lot of time to make a good one. It takes a lot of skill. So is it really worth it? So you really have to think about that, and that's something that really depends very much on the data that you have been presented with. But basically, you have to ask yourself these questions. You have to decide, first of all, you have to basically ask yourself, when you look at this spreadsheet you're being sent, is it worth visualizing? Is there something in there that is exciting, interesting, can be turned into something attractive? That's question one. Next question, is the data going to be more easily understood? Just by plonking in a picture doesn't necessarily make it more easy. Sometimes a sentence can actually be sufficient to explain a piece of the information rather than drawing a fancy illustration around it. Yeah. So as designers, we often can get carried away with, "Oh, this could look so pretty," but is it really going to be more effective? So you have to take a step back and think about that a bit. And last but not least, is the data actually interesting to the audience? I've seen so many infographics of such boring information where you think, really? It's pretty, but did you need it, really? So you have to decide that. And that's on an individual basis. On every client, every company has their own needs. Here's an infographic about whether you need an infographic. You won't have time to follow this. Flowchart is we'll look later at different types of infographics, so different methods visual techniques to use in infographics. This is a very nice one, a flowchart. Flowcharts are, where your central idea, in this case the idea is here in the center, and then it all goes off, but it could be on the top, and a journey from the top down to the bottom of the page. But it's the most engaging of all forms of infographics, because you're traveling through kind of a roadmap and with yes and no questions, or if and when, and that makes you spend a lot more time. So from basically people are more willing to spend a lot of time on something like that if they're interested, because it's basically they go, oh, let me try the other route. So this is a very engaging way of communicating, flowcharts, if you have that kind of data that has a yes and no answer, where you actually have to travel through different options in your story. Yeah, and obviously this is a company advertising. A lot of the ones I'm showing you is companies trying to tell you that you need one. So every single one of these will lead to yes, you need one, and here's the company that can do it for you. So you've got to be careful where the infographic comes from as well, right? So, great. So we know what an infographic is, and imagine that you've decided that you do need one. So the next challenge, we're not even designing yet. We're just at the stage now where we're, digesting it and decided that we need an infographic of some sort. So now it's time to find the story. Just an example of a spreadsheet of the type of data that you might be given. You might be given data with lots of graphs and charts and tables in it. Or you might be given data that is just a blurb of text, and they say, can you turn that into an infographic? Or just, a table like this, and say, turn that into an infographic. So there's all kinds of different ways that data can come towards you as a designer. And finding the story, basically, how do you find what actually is worth illustrating? How do you find the story behind the numbers? So here's a few tips, and this is the time-consuming process in the beginning. You need to actually look at your data, and the best thing to do is to look for comparisons and surprises in the text. Okay, so there's 3 types that can really pull a story together: the outliers, the trends, and the counterintuitive facts. Outliers are statistics that are outside the norm. So if I go back to this just for a minute, to this spreadsheet, which is just some financial data and how something, mergers and acquisitions over the quarters. If you look here, you see that it's all kind of going around, happily along the same kind of route, and then suddenly in the third quarter of 2011, whoosh, I can't even read, security for merger and acquisitions has shot up, but to 25 million. So that's an outlier. It's all kind of looking relatively even, and something has happened there. That's a story. That's something that's worth turning into an infographic. Okay? Just for example. So that's an outlier. A trend is more a movement. If you don't have anything that really jumps out at you, what's interesting is to kind of look at, trend over time, a timeline, for example, like how our company has performed in the last 10 years, that kind of thing. I'll show you timelines as examples later. Or an increase and decrease in sale, like if you have something that goes up and down, that's like a trend that moves forward, backward, up or down. That's something that's worth illustrating. And counterintuitive facts are the ones that are the most probably interesting if they are in your data. That's when something is happening that you wouldn't have expected to happen. Okay? So if you're looking at, let's say you're working for a book publisher, and you're doing an infographic on your sales of the last 5 years, and obviously Kindles and ebooks and stuff have taken over, and the printed books, the sales of printed material is becoming less and less. And suddenly you look at this data, and you see that in November last year, suddenly the sales of books, of printed books, went up much, much more than, so there was a downward trend, and then suddenly, whoosh, it went up for that 1 month, and then it plateaued again. That would be a counterintuitive fact. Why, in a world where everything is going towards ebooks, have we suddenly sold so many printed books? Obviously, just finding that in the data is not enough, because then it's not interesting. You can put that on a piece of paper. Our sales have gone, of books, of printed material has gone up by 10% in November. But if you just present that with a little icon of a book and the big numbers, it'll look nice, but people will want to know why. So that's where you then need to maybe go back and expand your research, which is where the relationship between designer and researcher comes in. You might just have a little bit of information, but if you really want to make it into a powerful infographic, you might need to pick up the phone and say, hey, can you give me some more information about what happened in November? Because that's interesting. And it might be that there was a book signing with a famous author that suddenly, and there was a huge marketing campaign around that with a lot of tweeting going on, and people rushed to buy the book. And, that just, for example, would be your story then. So it's not enough to just present the facts. Very often you need to go back and research the background behind it. Make sense? Which leads to the questions to ask when you are looking at the data. One of these is going to give you your story, even if you haven't got, even if you haven't got an outlier or a trend or a counterintuitive fact, because sometimes it's just, this is what we're doing, these are the services we've been providing, the top 5 things that our customers want. There's no outlier, trend, or counterintuitive fact. So it's just, an infographic on company performance or something like that. In that case, in all those cases, one of these 5 W's will be the answer to what to illustrate and how to illustrate it. So you need to ask the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and then there's the how. It doesn't fit into the 5W headline, but it's there. So, you're looking at a campaign that went really well compared to other campaigns that didn't go well, and you want to make an infographic. So then you might ask what caused it to go so well, why did it happen, and how does it compare with the past? Those kind of questions. And somewhere in your data you'll find that answer. One of those 5 W's or the how will be the hook, the main hook of the story. And then around that hook you then do the rest of the infographic. You design the rest of the idea. Okay? Here's the 5 W's visualized in an infographic. The 5 W's of social games purchases here, and you see there's the who purchases them, where do they purchase them from, what do they purchase, when do they purchase it, why do they purchase it, and how much do they spend, the little how at the bottom. So an infographic using the 5 W's. That's kind of taking it very literally, but what I meant when I was talking about them is you're going to be finding one of those to make an infographic out, either the why or the who or the what or the when, not all of them necessarily. So assuming you've done all this research now and you've got your data and you've found the hook, you can start designing. Yay! The design process. It's not just the design process, it's also the writing process, really, because before, you can't just now sit down in front of Illustrator, which, by the way, should be the program to use for creating infographics, and just start designing. You need to map it out. You need to sketch it out with your central idea and deciding how to visualize it. So there's still a little bit of work to be done before you can go and start actually laying out your design on a page. And this, for me, is one of my favorite quotes on infographics. The only way to communicate is to understand what it is like not to understand. What I mean by that, or what this quote means, is that very often, especially if you've been working in the same company for a long time, you know the data, you know what you're representing, or like if you're working in finance, again, you know the language that people use and the colloquialism and like all that stuff, and you've looked at the data and you can pretty much know what's going on. If you're a data researcher, then you're trained to look at numbers and get it straight away. But if you're communicating an infographic, you are communicating to people who have no clue about, unless you're creating an infographic within your industry, that's a different story. Then people will already have background knowledge, right? But assuming you're going to the general public with an infographic, you need to remove all your knowledge. Go, I don't know anything about this topic. How do I make this infographic work for someone who doesn't get it, who doesn't know anything about this topic, this industry, the data that I'm trying to visualize? So remove yourself from the knowledge, which can be quite hard. If you're a doctor, again, for example, and you know all the terminology, having to remove yourself from that and just go, how do I explain to my patient what's wrong with them without actually using all the fancy words? That's kind of what the designer, again, needs to do in infographics, is take a step back from all the stuff you know and, go back to basics. And with that in mind, you have to create a wireframe. Any of you who have ever been on a writing course, be it journalism or creative writing, you're going to see the inverted triangle. Does it look familiar at all? Basically, you'll be learning about setting up a story with your main idea and then your supporting information and then your, the finishing touches to the story. And it's the same with an infographic. You find your hook, your main idea, which is one of the 5 W's that we talked about earlier, the who, the where, the what, and all that. Or the outlier, the trend, the counterintuitive fact, yes? And then that's going to be on the top of your page. Not necessarily, it can be in the middle, but that's your main idea, and around that the design unfolds. And then you put in your supporting information, the extra bit of data. Sometimes you'll put in a boring bar chart without any, or like just some boring bit of like just data amongst the creative bits, just to give the details and more the meat of the story. And you might have already lost half your audience by that time, but then you always have to go into the further details and always quote your source at the end of your infographic. I'll show you in examples later. At the very bottom of the page, there will always be a little tiny blurb about where you got your statistics from, so that people can actually follow it up. And that's quite important if you want to be, show integrity, really. So you have to set up the principle of the inverted triangle. You have to set up your story like that, and then I would probably go about sketching it out. So once I've got that down, like the story that I want to tell, then I would go and decide how to start the actual real design process. And in that case, what's really important is to decide on a format. Okay? Basically, it's completely different if you're designing for print or designing for web. And I'll show you some examples in a second. Because if you're designing for print, first of all, there's no such thing as an infographic that goes on multiple pages. I mean, an infographic has to hit you on a single page straight away. So in print design, that means that you're going to probably be dealing with landscape or, portrait, A4, A5, whatever it is you're designing for. And that will be your canvas, and you can't go beyond that. So you have to map out your story, your hook, and your supporting information around that. On the web, you're a lot more flexible. because it's, yes, you have the screen size, but you can scroll down to tell your story as long as you want. Let me just show you what I mean by that, which means leaving this for a minute. So that would be an example of a print document. Just, I mean, it doesn't look quite like an A4, but it was taken from an A4 sheet. And just in terms of, you know, you've got your hook, your main central idea, the graph, which is a timeline in this case, in the center, and then all your information coming off it on the side. They used mostly typography in this case to just make the numbers pop. And then you've got your details here at the bottom. I think the source is quoted on the side there in tiny, tiny writing. So that's print. Another example of print, like a landscape design. You can see how different the designs will be depending on your audience. So if you're dealing with finance and, you know, or in a more corporate environment, you'll be a lot more, you'll hold back a lot more creatively than if you're doing something fun and, you know, colorful for non-corporate environments. But again, this is an A4 example with your main idea, which is usually the heading, you know, digital nation, facts, statistics, and etc. And then you're kind of traveling around the page and exiting with the information, the not so important information. Another one, this is probably just on an A4, but like on the top of an A4 page. But again, the central idea, the hook is very clear. This is your school on drugs, boom. Then they've used a bubble chart, which is a nice way to visually represent data, because they haven't actually done it as well as they could have, because the numbers could be really large in the bubble. There's so much room to, rather than having a pie chart or a bar chart, bubbles are more, you know, free-flowing, and you can do more with them. But anyway, there we go again, print. Moving on to another print. Moving on to web. No, print. A4, sorry. Another one. That's a typical classic, you know, flyer or like, you know, financial data. And you see, again, they might go, this is quite a, you know, sedate looking one. It's not so overly creative, but it's actually very nice visually still. And it's very corporate. They kept to their color scheme, and they've kept to their, you know, to their identity, and using those greens. But again, the hook is the top. That's where your eyes are drawn to, towards that first number of how much money they raised. And then you go down towards the supporting information, and then the details are here for those people who are still interested at that stage. But the main focal point is on top, and then you're kind of guiding the eye down towards the less important stuff. And so here's an example of web, but basically what you would see, this is if I zoom out of a web banner, and you see that's how long it is. And there's a few that are, I mean, they can be really long. There's one that I've got that is, look how long that one is. But what you see when you first launch the website, of course, is just the top idea, which is, you know, it would be on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side of a web page. You know, in a 2-column layout, for example, it might be 1 column. And the main hook will be, again, the top, leading you in. But then, this is what's so great with the web, then you can travel as long as you want down. Oh no, hang on. I think I might have to exit. No, that's fine. Sorry. You know, you're traveling down through the page, and basically you can tell many more stories here than you can on a printed page. This could be almost 3 infographics in one banner, so to speak. Yeah. So just one more, just to get the idea. Not necessarily all of these are like, wow, but some are nicer than others. But you see there's that common theme. Also on a web banner, don't leave the background completely white, because most websites have a white background, in which case it would just float and won't look like there's a beginning or an end. So you should have some kind of a background color, so that it's contained within the website, and you can actually see that there's a story continuing, so that when the first thing you see is this, you will still know that there's more to read, that the hook is not the only thing, and that there's supporting information continuing along the bottom there. Yeah. So that's web versus print, obviously completely different. And the bad news for designers is it means you can't just have the same design and use it for web and for print. You actually have to redesign your infographic and create two different ones in order to take advantage of those two mediums, really. Okay. So what time is it? How are we doing? Okay, well, we started what time? Quarter past? Or 10 past? Okay. The infographic of infographics, basically what type of, which is talking about the visual methods that you have available to use. Basically, the question being, now that you know you want to create an infographic, and now that you know that you know what format you want, and you've created your wireframe, you need to decide on, from all the different ways of making infographics interesting, which ones will work for yours. Which visual method should I use? So this infographic here is just showing, it's just a bunch of statistics about what most infographics consist of. So there's a lot of bar charts and infographics. These are the countries that most use infographics, etc. So basically bar charts, pie charts, and pictures are a very, very big part of creating infographics. And I'm just using the coffee example to decide. So let's say you present it with this, and somebody says to you, we want people to quickly know how to make coffee. Obviously, again, if you are presented with a little piece of paper like that, you're not going to be that interested in wanting to know how to make that an espresso versus a cappuccino versus a mocha. So these are two solutions by two different designers using a Venn diagram. Venn diagrams are where circles overlap, and where they overlap, that's where they have things in common. Where they don't overlap, they don't have things in common. So they might be, the typography is a disaster, don't even, I didn't do this, but they might be cute and nice to look at, but would you know how to make a macchiato now based on that? Probably not. And would you want to be bothered to spend the time understanding what's going on here? Probably not. So it's kind of nice, but it doesn't necessarily do the job. Which is, again, as an infographic, it's not just supposed to be pretty, it's supposed to convey the information, right? Here's another solution, just for example, where it's, again, very attractive to look at. Lots of little, basically, pie charts. They're almost, you can think of them as pie charts with, like, consist, quarter for this and 3/4 of that, in little cups. Still, I find this quite confusing, and again, a lot of different visual references, and I still wouldn't know how to make a cappuccino versus a macchiato from that. So, okay. And then, my favorite from this lot. Very nice and simple, clear icons, always the same color being used for the same elements, the same typeface, the same size, the same everything. And, I think we could all go now and make a cafe au lait based on that. So just a little, kind of flippant example of different ways of creating infographics, and that it's not always going to be, the right answer is not always going to be the thing that you want to use, like, oh, I like Venn diagrams, yeah, but they don't always work. So you really need to think about what works best, okay? And for that, we would spend a lot of time looking at all the different things that are at your disposal when you are creating infographics. Bar charts are super popular. So hang on, I'm just going to another document. Yeah, bar charts. Here is a boring one. It could be worse. At least there's a nice color scheme going on, but still, it's not infographic quality bar chart. Here's another one that isn't exactly infographic quality, although they've tried. So bar charts are a fantastic opportunity. Ooh, 5 minutes, okay. I'll just go through just a few of the many, like bar charts, pie charts, maps. I just want you to see the wealth of visual elements that you have at your disposal to create the infographic. So yeah, just very quickly. So this is a really creative approach to it. This is actually a bar chart, believe it or not, or it started its life as a bar chart, and then the designer went with it. So there is no X and Y axis, there's no legend. But what they've done is they've put the data into the actual bar. So they've gotten rid of the axis, there's no more need for that on the side, and the legend, etc., and just put the information in there. They've used icons so that you immediately know it's about cars. You know, this, again, I could show you literally thousands of amazing bar charts. I'm not crazy about, I don't know why these are so tiny, but it's just to show you, again, you use an icon, it's so, about how many men and women eat different chocolate bars. You can see that women are always eating more, regardless of which brand. But, yeah. So that's also a bar chart, and this infographic here, all these elements in here are bar charts. But what they've done is, again, there's no X and Y axis, and I always get rid of that in my infographics, and I just put, one, like maybe the X axis can be above the bar, and the Y axis can be inside the bar, like the actual numbers. So there's so many, and then of course color scheme and all that to make it pop. This is going completely crazy, but it was a bar chart once upon a time, using imagery and making the players bigger or smaller depending on, what was this one about? The number of mentions in a week, different players and how often they get mentioned. I think on Twitter or something. So, and if you're going to do something as intense as this, you would still give the data, the actual information for people who really want to know at the bottom. So a lot of financial industry infographics will have a very interesting graphic, but then they will still have the bar chart that brought you there underneath, smaller, so that people who want just the grid, the data, will still be able to see it. Okay, just another example. Again, a bar chart. It was a bar chart. It's now a syringe. So very nice typography treatment. That in and of itself is a nice infographic with the strong hook, which is the headline, which should never be more than 3 to 5 words in your infographic. The heading, the main idea, the central idea. So don't give a sentence like, "This is how we have been performing in the last 5 years." Say, "Our performance, 5 years." In the last 5-year overview. Just make it snappy so that people really want to immediately get it. Another, once upon a time it was a bar chart, and now it's a field of men running. So, yeah, so you can be very, very creative, but most of you are probably looking at this thinking this is too much. Like, if you're working in corporate design, you can't quite go as crazy as this. So, or this, where the bar chart actually, the icons are replacing bars, which is really nice if you have something, if you're talking about a product, you could use the product as the bar rather than, and this is all Illustrator, by the way. Don't ever use PowerPoint for infographics. You need a vector-based design program to create nice infographics, really. Here, this is an achievable example for a corporate designer, okay? This was, again, these are 3 different bar charts, and again, you see the numbers are inside the bar, really nice and noticeable, and so there's no more legend, and then they've used little icons for each industry, and a little bit of text to explain what's going on, and that's a very classic example. So you see, you can go completely nuts and have image, like the image of baseball players, large and small, or you can do something like that. And just to show you, this is the infographic that it came from, which as a whole works really well with, even though the headline in my opinion is a bit too long, I would have shortened that, but online is the fastest growing channel for non-profits. A bit too much. I would have made it much, much snappier. But yeah, so you see they've stuck to the color scheme, and there's pie charts, and there's bar charts, and all that within. Oh gosh, running out of time. Very, very quickly. Pie charts. Really, really dull and boring usually, but they can be so interesting if you do the infographic route. Here's a nice infographic with pie charts. Pie charts. So pie charts obviously are useful when anything divides into 100, and if you want to show, like 100% of something. But it's not great for small. People don't visually recognize small, minute differences. So something like this it doesn't lend itself really to a pie chart because there's too many separations. Pie charts are more useful if you're showing, 2 or 3 sector divisions, not more than that, or maybe 4. But so, and you can use imagery. You see. Or this is a really nice infographic. The whole infographic. These are all. One way or another, it's that the central image, the hook, is a pie chart. It's just inside of the little clock. 80%, that's very strong and noticeable. See, so that's an example of taking a pie chart and making it something completely different. Or, and something I really like to do, is cut a hole into my pie chart so that I can use the center for text. Rather than having, these big pie charts that take up the whole page with just color, you can, cut a hole and use that. Bubble charts. Bubbles are great. Bubbles are often used with maps. So, so that you can have a map in the background and then you can have bubble-like data. Rather than having lots and lots of bar charts, you can show the difference in size and compare different, amounts by using larger circles and smaller circles. And again, you can use Illustrator to scale it up and down in percentages. And the nice thing about those is that there's room for typography to put in nice words and things like that. So bubble, I like them personally. That's a tree using, purely text, but again, using bubbles. Bubbles. I have to kind of scroll through, I'm sorry, but I want to leave a little bit of time for questions as well. Here's a nice little financial example where, again, very good in the way that, boom, the hook, the central idea, how we pay for things. That's the first thing you see. It's large, and, and then you've got all the supporting information. There's so much data. There's a tremendous amount of data in this infographic. But it works somehow, except for, I don't know, those boxes with the text inside, like retailers in a white box. I'm not so sure about that. And then you've got your details down here, again, So, a Venn diagram, but more in a jokey way, like this is more for humorous approaches and ad campaigns. Flowcharts, which I mentioned to you earlier. Flowcharts are brilliant because they are a journey, and you're going to want to spend that time reading the yes and the no and looking through the page. A Google flowchart, which is done like in a more cute, hand-drawn kind of way. You see, there's so many ways to go. Infographics can be amazing fun, but they do take a lot of time. A journey through a page using a flowchart with icons, heavy icon-driven flowchart. This is great, finding a typeface for a campaign. And timelines. Timelines are great, and a lot of companies use them because, again, often you don't have an amazing hook or a counterintuitive fact, but you want to tell a story about your company's performance or something over time. This is Lego, so of course it's going to be fun and cute. Whereas if in a more corporate environment, it'll be more sedate looking, but still, this is a more corporate approach to a timeline. But you see, you've got the line going around the center, and then you can have lots of icons, text, maps, and stuff going off it. And a lot of infographics, all what I'm showing you now, a lot of times infographics combine all these things. So here you've got a timeline and a pie chart, and a map mixed together. I think they're going to kick me out in a second. This is somebody's CV done in a timeline, which I think is just brilliant. And she said, always have a key at the bottom to explain what the colors mean if you're going to have something like this. So she's telling her web design work and her social media work in different colors. It's nice. A boring timeline. Lots of text. Comparison charts are very good as well. So if you have just a table of text, you can make it more interesting by using icons. This might not be the most exciting example. This is a nice example of comparison chart. You see the icons are consistent, the design is very clear. Always use the same size icons, the same color scheme, so that people don't have to look too hard to find what's going on. So you're comparing the 3 different countries and how the work balances in different countries. And again, the hook is clear because the headline is 3 words, boom, it brings you in, and then you've got your information, and you've got your source and your details at the bottom, so it's that clean. As designers, you have to do all the same things that you do with any other layout. Proximity, alignment, flow, all that stuff. Repetition, harmony. Ooh, that's Pressure. Okay, I'm going to stop. I mean, maps. Maps are huge. Using maps and pulling out bubbles from the maps. So using the map in the background and pulling out ideas. Those are your main, I think, tools. Bar charts, pie charts, maps, bubbles, and all that. Here's a nice map with bubbles and connector lines. So again, there's a lot of data here, but it works. So just to conclude, one more little thing. Last thing, I promise. Just from a designer's perspective, the tips, and we could spend days on this alone, teaching Illustrator specifically for infographics. Always use a vector software. Don't rely on PowerPoint because you won't be able to do what I just showed you in PowerPoint. Create yourself a reference library of icons so that you don't, otherwise it takes forever, these infographics. But if you know that whenever you're showing people, the amount of people who, like population, etc., you already have your little people icons ready and you already have your maps ready, so you just need to pull them out and colorize them. It saves a lot of time. So start creating a reference library. There's so many free ones on the internet as well, so you can get free vector libraries and then start messing around with them. And keep it simple, keep it clear. Sometimes you can go crazy. Sometimes an infographic calls for a really creative, all-out approach, but most of the time, if it's corporate design, stick to the corporate brand and make sure that you don't overthink and over-design it, but keep your focus on the story you're telling. And that's basically it. Any questions? Yes?
Usually, how much time do you need, and how much do you charge?
Oh gosh, it's a huge market. It's an industry where you can literally charge from £300 to £3,000 for an infographic. And you know what it's like in the design industry. Somebody will quote with a zero less, and another person will quote with an extra zero at the end for the same job. So it depends whether you go to a massive agency or, time-wise, again, if you're restricted in time, then you just do something slightly more simple. But a really fancy infographic or campaign you can take several days to put it together. But often you don't have that luxury, so you'll just have to think about that when you're creating your keyframes. Say, oh, I have today, or I have the morning to do this. So let's just really quickly focus on the main idea. So it's kind of how long is a piece of string? It's time-consuming. They're not quick to do, basically. Yeah.
Conrad Taylor, I'd just like to put down a marker to say that I would approach this subject completely differently from you.
Okay.
And so looking at a lot of the examples that you're putting forward as good practice, I saw there's an overuse of circles. Circles are quite difficult to read the data from. Some of the typography and contrast was difficult. But I think the thing that comes to me more and more again is that I feel that it's important that an infographic should try to tell the truth and to make the data easy to understand. And a lot of those examples were using techniques that were misleading. And it's quite possible also that a designer is pushed by the information source, in effect, to tell lies. So you've got lies, damned lies, statistics, and infographics, and I would have hoped it would have been somewhere the other way around.
Well, exactly what I was saying the whole time, that you have to be very careful with your sources and what the infographics we're bombarded with on Pinterest and Instagram very often can be misleading, can be over-designed, which is why in the examples I showed, that they weren't all, oh, this is what you must do. They were showing an array of what's possible within the industry. But if, for example, when I was showing you these ones here, there's the more corporate approach, which, will be a more, sedate color palette, a more, holding back a little bit more on the crazy. Whereas the Lego examples and the Disney examples obviously are all about the visual and less about the data. I agree with you. In an ideal world, it's a 50-50 approach, and your data needs to drive the story.
And the other thing is that I would equally stress to clients the importance of table design, because often a table is the best way to communicate the data, but they don't know how to design the tables to make them readable.
Yes?
Hi. Are there any sort of animated or interactive
Yes, we didn't have time in this short time span to go there. All these can be the start of an animated infographic. So you would probably in a campaign have both the print and the animated version. So yeah, you would start with the same icons. You can start with Illustrator, and then it's often After Effects that you would use to, yeah, with that as well.
So would they still be classed as infographics?
Yes,
even if they're animated?
they're called animated infographics. Yeah.
Interactive. So you sort of go through the stories.
I have a few, I brought examples, but we didn't have time. There's interactive ones, which are the ones like a web page that you click and something
like
happens.
Yes or no kind of thing.
Yes. And then there is the animated one, which is like a video that plays. So that's an animated infographic moves in front of your eyes. And an interactive one makes you click on things to respond to stuff. But they all start off with the same idea of pulling out the data, telling the story. All right, well, thank you. You're very welcome. Yeah, it's called Thinking Made Visual.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, thank you. Lovely, thanks. Thinking Made Visual.
Okay.
I know it's very long.
Thank you.
Welcome. Oh gosh, what is it? Hi, Lo. So I'm just trying to. Sorry, I'm just trying to turn off my video recording and I don't know where to do that. Okay. Are you next, right? I'm moving. I'm just trying to figure out. Can you just wait 1 second? Do you know how I can turn off? I've been recording this, but I don't know where to stop
You just
it.
press escape and then stop.